Content warning. This episode contains discussion of the murder of 2 girls.
Over the years, as we all know, the Delphi murders have attracted intense media coverage. Recently, a new book came out on the case. It's called The Delphi Murders: The Quest to Find the Man on the Bridge.
The author is Nick Edwards. Nick, of course, is one of the creators and hosts of True Crime Garage, along with the captain. They've covered the Delphi murders quite a bit, along with hundreds of other cases. We've gotten to know the captain through covering the Delphi case, and we know how much this case means to him. Now we're excited to have Nick on the show to share his thoughts on the case.
We'll go into various persons of interest, law enforcement strategies, and the behind-the-scenes process of publishing a true crime book.
My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
We first connected while looking into the Burger Chef murders, an Indiana cold case. Together, we built a spreadsheet documenting hundreds of cases of restaurant-related homicides. That original spreadsheet gave way to our podcast, The Murder Sheet.
Now we maintain that same research-centric, investigative approach as we look into all sorts of homicides, including unsolved cases, historical crimes, and, of course, restaurant murders.
We don't just chat about the headlines. Our podcast is a platform for our journalism. The Murder Sheet focuses on investigative reporting, thoughtful analysis, thorough research, and in-depth interviews.
We're the Murder Sheet.
And this is The Delphi Murders, a conversation with Nick from True Crime Garage.
Sure, you hit record and I'll start flapping my gums.
Yeah, I love it.
Perfect.
You know the podcasting business. Well,
Exactly.
much more than us. Awesome. Okay, great. I guess maybe we could jump in. If you could tell us, we know that you guys on the True Crime Garage have covered this case extensively. Could you tell us a bit about how you first heard about the Delphi case and what about it sort of grabbed you and sort of stuck with you over time?
Well, what grabbed me immediately about the case was that it was something so horrific that took place during broad daylight and in a very public setting. And that is, we've reviewed hundreds of cases on True Crime Garage, but this one in those set of circumstances are not particularly common when we're talking about homicide case. And then you have to factor in that we have 2 victims instead of just one. And so it's a very complicated investigation, but also a very complicated scenario for a killer to put themselves into. It seemed like a very risky situation. And so I was very intrigued immediately by the criminal or the perpetrators of this crime and who they could be. And in all reality, I actually thought it would be solved very quickly, even before we knew that there was video and audio, just given the nature that the victims were so young, that typically the younger we are, the smaller our social circle. And typically somebody, when you have these types of crimes, specifically a homicide, we're talking, it's usually person A is angry or has reason to be angry with person B, and there's some kind of fight, struggle, or attack, assault, murder that takes place. And so initially when I saw that the girls were found, is when I really became intrigued. And that was just through online, pretty random internet searching. I believe that I didn't become aware of the case until the evening after they were found. It was started off as a missing persons case. The two girls, they go out on a walk and they seem to have vanished. The families can't find them. And that usually doesn't make the news. It might make it locally, but not any further than that, because it's not uncommon for teenagers to be where they're not supposed to be. Mm-hmm. Right. And so that wasn't really news here in Ohio where I live. But by the time the girls were found, it was news. And I was immediately reading about it. And again, thought it would be a short, simple case that they would likely find or believe they knew who was responsible relatively quickly.
One thing that we've noticed about the case and specifically the coverage of the case, and I'm sure you've seen this too, is just that it sort of feels like the 5 or 6 years we've kind of been into this, there's been massive media bursts and then kind of quiet periods. But in the quiet periods, I think people kind of flock to it online to discuss it, to speculate, to kind of talk about theories. And I guess, for you, why do you think that's the case? What about this case sort of has spoken to people and sort of driven this quest for more information on it?
I think that it's just the intrigue of the case itself. And, I think there's a natural very human reaction to things, especially when we see something like teenage girls attacked in a public place where you're going out to enjoy the day. And for Abby, it was almost going to be like a growing point, a milestone for a young girl. It's a bit of a rite of passage out there to walk across that Monon High Bridge. And from my understanding, Libby had done it before. She has an older sister, so maybe her older sister or some older kids took her down there at some point and she walked across with them or some other family. But from my understanding, this was Abby's first time doing this. And Libby, who was her best friend, and I kind of fill in some of the blanks myself on their relationship from not knowing either one of them, but reading about them and kind of observing from afar here. And it looked to me, from what I gather, that Libby might have been more of the leader of the two, if there was one. And regardless of what their relationship was, other than being best friends on that day, she certainly was the leader, taking her friend to the Monon High Bridge to help her walk across for the very first time. And it's the human element of it, right? That we want to be safe. We want to know how to protect ourselves. More importantly, we want to know how to protect our children. And we also want to know what the bad guy looks like. And this case kind of had a bit of all of that for everybody, right? If you can't be safe out on a nature trail, enjoying this big, beautiful earth that we've been so blessed to be a part of, then there's very few places that you can be safe. And then when we find out that there's an image, there's then a video, and there's audio of the guy, that I think is what got everybody kind of hooked on the case, because you're given just enough. And we say this when we talk about cases on True Crime Garage, that the cases that seem to fascinate the public are the ones that have a little meat on the bone, right? There's the story of somebody just poof disappearing into thin air. While it might be intriguing, it's only going to hold our attention for so long because there's no real story there. Here, there was so much story. There was so much of the story that was left out on purpose by law enforcement once they started their investigation, and how they chose to release some information and the wording that they chose to use along the way. But I think that one thing that was different, and I shouldn't say this is not unique because we've seen this with other cases as well, but it is uncommon, But you have this case, and I think that my thoughts and feelings of it being solved relatively quickly were probably shared by many people who were paying attention to the case. Very rarely do we have a picture of the guy, a video of the guy, and audio of the guy talking, the suspect talking, and we're given these little nuggets of information every so often from law enforcement in this case, but never the whole story, never everything that they knew or never anything that they suspected. And then, as you said, Anya, then we get this long period of nothing. And a lot of times these cases, especially the ones that, you can argue, we could all sit around and debate how cold this thing was, if it ever was cold. But, in the end, it was nearly 6 years before there was an arrest. And it's natural. It's a little disgusting. But when there is nothing for a while, yes, you're right. That's when people took to the internet and attempted to fill in the blanks themselves. And sometimes they did it respectfully, and sometimes they did it rather disrespectfully.
Yeah, and I got to say, I was absolutely in the same boat as you. I remember vividly back in 2017 sitting in my parents' kitchen with my mom, and she was talking about how awful it was. And I remember saying something like, well, they have his face. They're going to find him relatively quickly. Mm-hmm. So was very wrong about that. But I think you're absolutely right. A lot of people thought that initially. You and the captain have covered the case extensively on True Crime Garage. And I'm curious, what made you, and you've covered so many cases, obviously, what made you decide to then sort of take some of that and then write a book on Delphi in particular?
That's a great question. And full disclosure, I don't know that I fully understand the answer to that 100% myself. Sometimes you get intrigued by these things and we don't know exactly why. There's certainly all these cases that we've reviewed, and there's a handful of them to me that just will not leave me. And I don't know why. They're no more tragic than the next case. They're no more sad or heartbreaking than the last case. The victims are no more important than the ones in other cases. So it doesn't make a whole lot of rhyme or reason why, but I think a lot of people will share that and have experienced that themselves, that for some reason there are certain stories, real life stories, and unfortunately this one is a horrible tragedy, that affect us and affect us greatly, deeply, and on a different level. And that this is one of those cases for me. And it was one that I had an obsession with. And even very bizarrely, I hope it's not lost on the people that are nice enough to read the book. But the book is as much about the investigation as it is about the actual crimes. And really, that's what I found myself doing in this case. And we do that a lot on True Crime Garage. And I think that a lot of people do this, knowingly or unknowingly. But that this case had the added element to it that you almost needed to investigate the investigation, because there was so little information about the actual crimes and about the actual evidence. That's what I found myself doing was really hanging on every word and dissecting every sentence that law enforcement chose to release. Because really, in the grand scheme of things, 5.5 years, almost 6 years, there wasn't, they reached out from time to time with press releases and information, seeking information and wanting help from the public and such. But really, at the end of the day, when we're talking that span of time, there was so little information that came out and so little of law enforcement standing up in front of the public and telling us what they knew.
The murder sheet takes a lot of time and effort, whether we're interviewing detectives, digging through archives, or rushing to local libraries to record after a court date. That means that come mealtimes, sometimes it's a bit daunting to try to throw together something that's tasty, healthy, and affordable.
That's no longer a concern thanks to HelloFresh. They're America's #1 meal kit for a reason. You get the convenience of pre-portioned ingredients delivered to your door. This food is healthy and nutritious with so many farm-fresh ingredients. Plus, it's been fun to try out new meals. It takes all of the anxiety out of trying to research recipes and get it right on the first go.
We have also really enjoyed cooking together. It's a way for us to spend quality time together outside of work. The instructions are super easy to carry out, which is helpful because we're both prone to kitchen mishaps. Plus, we both have loved HelloFresh's meals. That's especially impressive because Kevin is very choosy when it comes to food.
My favorite HelloFresh meal was those delicious hamburgers we made some time back. They were topped with melted cheese, tangy sauce, and caramelized onions. The onions smelled amazing, and prep and cleanup were a breeze. If you've been thinking of trying out HelloFresh, we'd strongly recommend it.
Go to HelloFresh.com/msheet16 and use code msheet16 for 16 free meals plus free shipping. Again, go to HelloFresh.com/msheet16 and use code msheet16 for 16 free meals plus free shipping.
And one thing I found very interesting about the book was it not only was about this terrible crime, but you also discuss your own background in history, both as a podcaster and as a lifelong student of true crime. So I'm curious, can you talk about what originally got you interested in true crime?
Yeah, so at a young age, I was very much into like the mysteries of the world, right? Pyramids, sea monsters, all of that kind of stuff. And I still think that there's a child in all of us that has an interest in some of that stuff. But as I got to be I'm probably right around 8, 9 years old, that stuff started to feel a little silly. And I was watching Unsolved Mysteries and talking with kids my own age and maybe a little bit older about some of the mysteries of the world, UFOs and Bermuda Triangle and all that good stuff that I found very intriguing. And it was a bit of an awakening to learn that with things like JFK and that's probably the one that I think of immediately, or even Elvis, right? Elvis is still alive. He's hiding out somewhere. He's probably living it up. He's very old by now, I would imagine, but he's living it up with hopefully we're right? Hopefully he's living it up with Tupac and Biggie, and they're just having a good old time, enjoying the fruits of their labor. But, having conversations, with kids a little bit older than me that look, things aren't exactly as they always appear to be. Maybe I was just naive, but when I was young, I just thought that there was a clear line in the sand between good guys and bad guys, and the bad guys were easily spotted, and there were so many good people and very few bad people, and I was naive enough to believe that all the baseball players in the major leagues they made it there because they took their vitamins, they exercised, they helped old ladies across the street, and they said their prayers and went to bed on time, and I thought that's how you made it in this world. And, so you kind of come of age and you learn that, everything's not so black and white. And just because somebody has told you something or it's been in the history books as such for so many years or decades, that might not be the whole story. And so I slipped into true crime very quickly. And from that fascination of these world mysteries, and I thought, well, these, Nick, you're not going to be the one to definitively ever be able to say if UFOs exist and if they bother to visit our planet or not. But the case that happened down the street that you can read about in your local paper that may not be solved, or when Amy Mahalovic was taken from Bay Village in 1989 when I was still a kid. That was a story that was on the news. And so I quickly found myself being very intrigued by true crime. And I think I say in the book at an uncomfortably young age And I only said uncomfortably young age because I didn't find it to be uncomfortable. But I think maybe some people around me did.
And then I'm also curious. Many people get interested in true crime as you did and read the books and all of that. But then you jumped from that into doing your own research and creating content, both on True Crime Garage and now in this book. How does creating and researching cases change your perceptions of true crime?
This is one that's a bit of a tough answer for me because while I don't possess a law enforcement background myself, my family does. I come from a family with a law enforcement background. So at the end of the day, I'm a blue blood. I stand with the women and men in blue, and I recognize how difficult their job is and why only some people can do it and do it that well. But I think one of the things that became incredibly intriguing to me, and very obvious actually, early on when we started covering these cases, was there was a handful of cases that are kind of known and famous for bad police work. And let's use like West Memphis 3, for example. Well, that case became a big case because of suspected bad police work, and they had found the suspects kind of before they found the evidence, and maybe tricked this kid into a false confession or several variations of a false confession. But one thing that I was shocked at was to learn how many cases that can happen in, and I don't want to say bad police work. And I don't want to say things like false confessions, but just law enforcement is like any other walk of life out there and any other job out there. There are people that are good at their jobs and there are people that suck at their jobs. And unfortunately, there's great doctors out there that save lives, and there's other doctors out there that just mail it in. And unfortunately, one thing that I learned rather quickly is, if you have a loved one that's murdered, or let's say you yourself were to be a victim, your case is only as good and only as strong as the detective whose desk the file happens to land on at the end of the day. That was one thing that was interesting to me. Another thing that was a bit shocking too was, in some of these unsolved cases, we primarily focus on, like you guys on Murder Sheet, we primarily focus on unsolved cases. And that's where my intrigue is. And also, not just the intrigue, but it can be an opportunity to potentially help somebody, and help further the case. I've always said that, if once we stop talking about these cases, then those stories go away. And it's almost like it never happened. And somebody was a victim, somebody was victimized, and to not tell their story is further victimization, especially when the case sits unsolved and when you have family and friends and such that are hoping and praying for some form of healing, some form of justice, some form of answers at the end of the day. So it was important to tell these stories, but also along the way, one thing that I learned when speaking with a lot of family members of victims was it was interesting to learn that in a lot of the cases, and certainly not all of them, but in a lot of the cases, I was surprised at how little that the families knew about what happened. And I found that a lot of them are very much like us in the general public. They know about the same amount of information that we know. And in fact, in a couple of cases that we've done that I've been able to spend a lot of time on, I found myself in conversations where I realized that the person sitting across the table, while the victim might have been their son, their daughter, their brother, their uncle, I know a lot more about the case than they did. So those are some of the things that I think that the average Joe wouldn't know until you get into this, and probably wouldn't expect either.
You know, one thing, when people talk about True Crime Garage, one thing you hear over and over again is praise for the quality of the research you do. And so I'm curious, can you talk to us about your research process and how you go about it?
Well, I will try, Kevin. So this is the hardest question for me to answer, and I get this one frequently. And one of these days, Anya and Kevin, I swear to you, you and I we've been friendly, and I'll go as far to say that we're friends because we've had some interaction. I certainly very much enjoy your guys' show, and that's why I was very excited to be talking with you guys today. And I know that you guys have had some pretty good interaction with the captain as well.
He's awesome. We love the captain.
Yeah, exactly. So I swear to you guys, my new friends, that I one day will have a great answer for this question. I don't have it today, but and here's why, I think. And I usually start off by saying this, and I think it's so true, and I know you guys know this. Every one of these cases, while they might fall into a certain category, an unsolved homicide or an abduction case, a missing persons case, a restaurant robbery, like you guys talk about, homicides at a place of business, like you guys talk about a lot. None of them are cookie cutter. They are every case is so unique and so different from the others. And so for my research process, I try not to limit myself or even have a step-by-step process of how I go about it, because I think you got to examine the case and then hit the ground running and see where what aspects of the case inspire you and what directions they send you. So that's more of a way of letting the information lead me, and hopefully I'm smart enough to find the next breadcrumb as we go, or at least have an idea of where to go to look for it. Because when you're doing research on these cases, as disappointing as it is, like, I need to have stuff for the story to tell the listeners and the readers. But as disappointing as it is to run into a dead end or to go looking for something and not find it, it's also checking off boxes, right? And going, okay, well, that's, at least I pursued that avenue, and now I know to take another one. I know that's not a great, clear answer there, but truly, I think that's a big part of it. That all of these cases are different. All of these cases are unique. All of the victims are individuals. All of the perpetrators they're individuals. And one thing that I try to do, that I learned from John Douglas, who we've had on the show a couple times, a retired FBI agent, John Douglas. He told me one time that they don't just profile the killer or the perpetrator. You have to profile everything. You profile the victim, you profile the killer, you profile the location, the setting, the situation, all of that stuff. And so if you can do that, I think it's the best way to fill in some of these stories. The other thing too, I think that some shows shy away from it, and we certainly got a helping of this in the beginning, where people didn't really love our approach. They thought that we added a little too much speculation. But look, if you're going to do a just the facts, ma'am type story, good luck filling an hour. And so what we try to do is offer up some educated speculation, right? Some things that we think that we can expand on based off of what we've seen in other cases, or maybe crime trends that were going on at the time in that location.
I think those are some really great points. I'm going to try one more research type of question, and that is, what are some of the differences between researching and preparing an episode of True Crime Garage and researching and preparing a book?
That's another great question, Kevin. So with us having over 600 episodes of True Crime Garage, I feel like I know the roadmap pretty well for putting together a story for True Crime Garage. This is still my first book, so who's to say the second one I might go about it completely different. But keep in mind, with the Delphi Murders book, we did have extensive coverage of the Delphi case before I sat down to start writing this book. I already had a great starting point, right? I already had all of this stuff that we had put together for I don't know, we may have had 16 episodes, 20 episodes. I don't know how many episodes we've done on Delphi. And we covered it, a lot of other things about the case on our other show, Off the Record, as well. So I already had a wealth of information, a wealth of knowledge, and a lot of stuff, notes and things that I have made over the years and things that I had collected over the years for the case. So I really had this file that I was building. Back when we first started, I would make an actual paper file, like almost like a police file on every story that we did. And Delphi, I had that file, and because we kept going back to it, that file just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger to the point where it was its own box. So for the book, in this case, I was able to use that, everything that I had collected over the years, as kind of the cornerstone of what would be that final story.
To get into more of like a process question for you regarding publishing, how did you go about getting it published, and can you walk us through that process of starting with deciding to write a book and then going to actually making that happen?
Well, thank you for asking this one, because I like the behind the scenes stuff, and not everybody asks the behind the scenes questions. So I had been approached a couple of times, and your guys' show is so good and strong, and you got a great audience. I wouldn't be surprised if you've been approached once or twice yourselves. But I had been approached a couple of times with, let's say, publishing companies that I was not familiar with their name. Mm-hmm. And hey, you got a great podcast, you got a great listenership. Let's turn it into, you want to do a book? It was a little flattering to have meetings with people that had clearly listened to the show. Sometimes I found myself in a meeting where 15 minutes into it, I'm like, yeah, they keep telling me how great my podcast is, but it's clear that they've never bothered to listen to 10 minutes of it. So, and I'm a bit of a bookworm myself, and we regularly recommend books. 90% of them are true crime, or we recommend other podcasts, recommend documentaries and things like that on the shows. But when speaking with those people that approached me, it was the same thing every time. It was like, I had ideas for a couple of true crime books. And very quickly, I realized after a couple of meetings that they weren't so interested in my ideas. They were interested in what they've seen work a couple of times, and they wanted to steer the ship and have me write their book and have my name on it and True Crime Garage on it. And that felt so damn cheap to me, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you guys know it takes such a long time and so much work to build your audience. And the moment that you lose sight and the moment that you disrespect your audience, they can go, right? The fall is always faster than the climb. Mm-hmm. And so we've always said this from day one. The most important thing to us, if anybody cares enough to listen, and if they care enough to come back and listen a second and third time and tell a friend, we are forever indebted to them. So I wasn't just going to rehash stories that we had told on the podcast. It felt cheap to me. It felt like making somebody a bologna sandwich, selling it to them, and then figuring out a way to sell it back to them without making a second one.
Right, right.
And so I thought, after having a couple of those types of conversations, I put it down. I was just too damn busy to write a book. And then, you know, you have these moments of clarity, right? I think we all have these. And one day I'm sitting around, I'm going, you know, this podcast idea started with, I was actually working and actively writing a true crime book. I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but I was actively writing it on Ohio cold cases when we started our podcast. And some of those stories became some of those chapters, I should say, became episodes of True Crime Garage. And so after we've had great success with True Crime Garage, I love doing the show. It's still my favorite thing. And I was just sitting around one day, and I think maybe a little hint of depression or something, or maybe I don't know what I want to call it. That might not be the right word, but it occurred to me. I'm like, you've been given this blessing of an audience, and you started off getting this audience because you were working on a book. It's always been a dream of mine, a life goal. And so I thought, you know what? You may not have this audience forever. So let's do this and let's do it now. And so then my approach became, who cares about publishers? We live in a day and age when you can self-publish. I have a great publisher, Wild Blue Press, for this book. But I thought, you know what? Rather than having these meetings, do what I did with the podcast. Let's write the book first. We'll sell it to somebody when it's done, and go about it that way.
Absolutely. I'm just more curious. You may have said this elsewhere. Had the arrest happened when you started writing it, and how did that sort of impact the writing process and kind of putting it out there?
Well, in this case, no. So I was pretty much done with writing the book, and you say done, right? But when you go out there and you shop it, and once you get a publisher, they're probably going to tweak some things or ask you to make a couple of changes. So the book was very near being done as far as I was concerned in the story that I wanted to tell. And actually, we were shopping it at the time, and we were getting some good feedback, but at the end of the day, we got turned down a couple of times because this was really interesting to me. I would have never guessed this in 100 years, but I was told several times that publishers very much prefer a solved true crime case. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting there having these phone calls and these meetings, and every time I keep hearing that, I turn my office chair around 180 degrees, and I look at my 3 bookshelves that are just filled with books about unsolved cases. And I'm thinking, well, what kind of idiot am I? How come I just don't, apparently I just don't get it. And so, yeah, I was told a handful of times that, the problem here, Nick, is this case isn't solved. And I can only speculate why that would be. My best guess would be that, you put out a book, 250 pages or something, and then a year later they solve it, and whatever you wrote in your book's completely wrong at the end of the day. Maybe there's no interest, and maybe the publisher's more concerned about being able to sell books for 10, 20, 30 years rather than 3 months or 10 months. Mm-hmm. And so with this one, no, it was weird because it wasn't completely done. It was darn near completely done as far as I was concerned. And then the arrest happened. And I actually talk about my experience of learning about Richard Allen being arrested in the book, mm-hmm. because I was out on what I call a field trip. I was driving up to Northwest Ohio to Paulding County to work on a case from 1960, a case that my nonprofit that I work for, the Porchlight Project, that they asked me to get involved with. Unfortunately, this victim was 14 years old. She was abducted and killed, and we actually raised funds to exhume her body because there was next to no physical evidence in her case at all. And as you guys know, right, we're thankfully living in like the golden age using technology to solve these old cold cases.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thought was, and the family were really pushing for this, but they needed our expertise and our help with some of the funding. The thought was, well, maybe we could exhume the body and then we would have some physical evidence. So we were able to exhume the body. But anyway, I was up on a field trip working for myself, running around up there when I got a text message from somebody in Indiana that said, "Hey, this is happening," and it was. These things are always big news for us, especially, you guys followed the case for so long. So I'm a little intrigued of how you found out and what your experience was. But it was weird for me because I was up there on a mission, right, to help these people and do a few things while I was up there. And this is a 2.5 hour drive. I get that text and all I could think of was, I got to get home.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you guys found out, but
oh man,
I would love to. I'd love to hear how because you guys are always on the wire with the court documents and things of that nature. So I would imagine your experience was probably rather different than mine.
Oh well, yeah, it was rough, honestly, because we heard from a very good source that there had been an arrest a few days before it was announced. So we were like almost certain something had happened, but we'd also seen so many instances where like everything went off the rails because somebody made an assumption, and we didn't want to be those people, flicking matches in a dry forest, essentially.
And I would say we were strongly encouraged behind the scenes.
Well, we just past experiences, it was a situation where we just didn't want to make anything, mess anything up, essentially.
Oh, well, with this case especially, we've all, with this case, we've experienced, what I think of as false hope, right? That we're so close now, and then, at the last minute, either nothing or something different comes out about it.
Yes, and we were like scarred by all these sort of crazy online experiences where you all of a sudden had people saying there's 20 police cars going to Delphi, and then turns out they're there for the Purdue football game, and you're like, okay, like how are we gonna do this? And so we had 2 days where we were basically like having a nervous breakdown privately because we wanted to find out more information. We wanted to get, in addition to also not wanting to be disruptive, we didn't really have any. We didn't have a name. We didn't have concrete information. We knew people it wasn't, but we didn't know who it was. So we kind of just decided as an editorial decision to kind of just play it as it came, and kind of maybe just the responsible thing to do is to not try to break anything on this, because we might end up just breaking our own credibility essentially, and disrupting the case in a way that was just needless. And yeah, it was a weird. I think I talked about this on the podcast once, but I remember we were walking around Target just going to like shop for something, and I felt like I was having an out of body experience because I was like, we are like almost certain someone has been arrested in the Delphi case. I'm sure if you asked the people around us in this Target line, a lot of them would probably care about this, because it's people care about this so much in Indiana. The girls are like, well known, people want justice for them, but we can't say anything to anybody. It was just a very surreal experience, but it was definitely very gratifying once the news came out, and Libby's grandma posted "Today is the day." It was just like a real moment of hope for, I think, a lot of people, as you experienced, where we've all cared about this for so long, and you're finally feeling like, okay, the process is moving.
Well, and it can be a roller coaster ride, especially this case, to follow these cases with your mind and your heart. But isn't it such a weird experience, because you feel this excitement and this happiness and this joy of, okay, here's an arrest. but then it's almost like you have the, like Tom Petty says, the hardest thing's coming down, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you come down from that joy and that excitement, and then you start using your head again instead of your heart. And you go, okay, well, there's a lot of boxes to check here to make sure that this is the right person.
Yes.
You know, we do have this legal system that you know, it's not perfect. We don't need to get into that discussion, but I do think it's one of the best in the world. And we have a process that we need to go through to make sure that this is the right guy. But it's also, it's that moment that you almost find yourself in tears when you go, okay, well, maybe they got the guy, but this ain't bringing Libby back. This ain't bringing Abby back. This is not going to heal the family completely. There's nothing that can. And, you know, so kind of that settles in as well. You know, and I mean, like you guys said, this case was so important to so many people, especially in the great state of Indiana. And I'm sure a lot of people felt that joy when there was an official announcement that somebody had finally been arrested. But again, it's a very heartbreaking case. And you referenced Becky Patty. I've been lucky enough to meet Becky and Mike, and I talk about that very briefly in the book. I interviewed Kelsey for a show that I did with a friend of mine, Bill Huffman, who hosts a show called Who Killed. And I mean, the victims here, you know, I said earlier that the victims aren't any different than, you know, that every victim's different, but they're not any more tragic or any more special than the other people that other great people lost. But these two girls they look and appear to have been just amazing people, amazing friends. The stories that their families have to tell about them and the experiences with them. And then meeting Becky, meeting Mike, meeting Kelsey and some of the family members just makes it all that more heartbreaking at the end of the day. And that was also a part of the purpose of this book. It wasn't to necessarily set the record straight or to tell it my way, but part of it was that I had seen the families mistreated and disrespected, and law enforcement that were involved in this case, and local leaders that had been disrespected and treated poorly online, and it drove me crazy. Mm-hmm. It infuriated me. These two families, and I say this in the book, in some weird way, their courage and their grace. You know, I've always said one's character is best judged in a time of tragedy, and I can't think of anything more tragic than this. And the way that they conducted themselves and handled themselves and responded and put themselves out there to the public, it made it even that more heartbreaking that such a horrible thing happened to such good people.
Well said. I want to jump in a little bit, since we touched upon the arrest of Richard Allen, just to maybe some of the case itself and the facts of the case. And obviously, we all know so many POIs have come up online from the news, from different developments that we've seen happen in that area, or even, you know, elsewhere in the country, where people are wondering, is this connected? Is that connected? And, you know, your book sort of gets into a lot of those, about the different people that came up. And I guess if you wanted to kind of, you know, were any POIs in particular of interest to you? Did you, or alternatively, that you were kind of like, maybe that's not it. And what did you just make of that kind of, just seemed like for a while there, for years, there was like a string of like, this guy comes up and then this guy comes up, and, you know, nothing was obviously happening. But how did you handle that in the book, and what were your thoughts on that?
Well, I certainly lay out some of my opinions of the different persons of interest over the years that were persons of interest as far as the public was concerned. Mm-hmm. You know, on occasion you would hear a statement or law enforcement being asked a direct question about a person that had recently been arrested for something. And, so I do offer up my opinions. There was several of those individuals that I thought made for a good, strong suspect, and a couple of them that I didn't think at all. I mean, their crimes were so different than this crime. Their actions were so different in those crimes than what I believe took place in this one. And not that getting away with anything makes you any more intelligent or even criminally sophisticated than the next guy. But I mean, there were some individuals that were being thrust into the spotlight by people online and to defend the people that thrust those people into the spotlight. These were bad men. These were bad individuals. There's no doubt about that. It's, but I think I said about Garrett Kurtz that I don't think he could organize a 2-car parade in the book, and I believe that's probably true. I am surprised. I mean, that horrible murder that he and his friends are guilty of is just a very weird crime, and I think only because people became fascinated with Doug Carter talking about the shack that people created something that there was. We say sometimes where there's smoke, there's fire, but I think that smoke was created. There was no real smoke in that situation. And then, a couple of the other individuals I didn't think would have stood a chance to get away with this even for 2 days or a week, let alone 5.5 years. And I do say too, the reverse of that. A couple of people in the couple of the persons of interest over the years that I thought, I spent weeks or months even convinced, like, yeah, it's probably, and your guys' show. I was following your guys' show for a lot of Kagan Klein information because you guys had the best Kagan Klein and Tony Klein information out there. You guys were presenting things that other people could not present because they didn't have that information. And so your guys' show was one that I was tuning into. It was one that I was checking out specifically for Delphi information. And I think I even sent you guys an email congratulating you at some point last year about how good the show is, in my opinion. And,
thanks. Yeah, we remember that.
And part of that too just happens to be that you've covered the I-70 killer a handful of times, and that's another case that really intrigues me. But yeah, I think I even say it flat out in the book that there were a span of 3 to 6 weeks where I thought, and I didn't jump on the Klein stuff right away, because with this case, and you said it earlier, once bitten, twice shy, right? Mm-hmm. You get that false hope, and you get overly excited about it, and then poof, it turns out to be nothing. So I always kept everything a little bit away from me as far as my heart and my mind went with the case. And the Kleins, I wasn't going to jump on that train real quick, and I didn't. I stayed off of it for a long time. But it did get to a point at some point where I thought, well, if these guys didn't have a hand in this, or one or the other, as far as the Kleins go, I've run out of answers. But then again, like I said, we've covered a few hundred cases on True Crime Garage, and it's not terribly uncommon to find these weird side stories that somehow wedge themselves into the middle of this bigger story.
Right. And I think you said this very well earlier. It's a matter of sometimes trying to cover the investigation becomes more important than, what we think is plausible. And I think that's where, it's been hard because the investigation is so tight-lipped and because information is so kept inwards that when you are finding indications that, say Ron Logan is a suspect early on, and then things move on to this person, and then maybe the Kleins, and then maybe it's like you're trying to, kind of interpret the shadows on the wall and figure out what they mean. And then it can turn out that it twists again and there's someone completely different, right? And it's kind of, I mean, and you know this just because you come from the law enforcement family, but oftentimes what the public is seeing is very different than what the investigators are focusing on.
Very different, and usually we don't have a clue compared to what they're working on. But in this case, part of me wonders, in hindsight, looking back on everything, you know, they did a very interesting strategy. They kept reminding, and they're not reminding us, the public. I think that's where things get lost. I think the public goes, wow, Doug Carter and ISP, they're doing such a great job reminding us and informing us how many officers are working this, how many tips are coming in, how many hours they're spending, how many agencies are involved, how many posts from the state police are working this case. You know, I think that a lot of people think that's for us. That's to justify the tax dollars being spent. That's to justify the man hours being spent. No. That's a strategy to scare the hell out of this rat, whoever he is, and snuff him out of his hole, right? To keep the pressure on the bad guy, the guy that you haven't identified yet. You don't know who he is. You don't know where he is. But that was for him. To say that we have all of these agencies and all these people working, and guess what? We won't stop until we find you. They were trying that tactic time and time again, and it's a smart tactic to do. For a large part, I thought it was going to work, especially in the early months, maybe up to the end of the first year or so of the case and investigation. But they were doing that for him to scare the hell out of the bad guy. And yeah, you're right. You do that. With this case, you had to investigate the investigation, because if you were going to learn anything that wasn't known to the public, that's the angle. That's where you were going to learn it.
And you know, and I touched upon your family's law enforcement background. I'm curious, you know, as you were looking into Delphi, whether it was through True Crime Garage or through this book, was your dad able to give you any insights? Obviously not like necessarily having a direct line to the case, but more of just like what he was seeing in the public space where he could say, I think this might be why this is happening.
So my father is retired, and being a detective and seeing some of the things that he has seen, at times it's kind of like talking to somebody that served in Nam, right? There might be some things they want to talk about, and there's definitely some things they do not want to talk about or do not want to relive. Mm-hmm. He didn't have a lot of opinions on this case, and mainly because I think he purposely did not pay attention to this case, given that the two victims were children. Yeah. You know, when he put that down years ago, I think he put down parts of that job that he decided he was never going to pick up again. Now, there's been plenty of other cases throughout the years that he's had really interesting insights. You know, there's been a couple where they're just a complete head scratcher to me. And like I said, we talked about earlier doing research for the show, and it's like sometimes I have to figure out where to go to find that piece of information that we're missing, or that part of the story that's missing. And I don't always know what that part is until I find it. And so the only way you're going to find it is if you know where to look. And so there's been a couple of times where I've typed up a 2-page, 3-page report on a case and handed it to him and said, hey, here's this. Take a look at it if you want to. And I'll call you in a few days. And if you have any opinions, just let me know. So he's certainly done that in a handful of cases for us. And that's been, I'm always very intrigued usually when he decides to take a look at something and I call him up and ask him, well, you know, what do you see here? Or what is this information telling you? Now, keep in mind, he's only basing any thoughts or potential leads he has off of the information I gave him. So it's not a complete 100% story, but he will often have a thought of something that I have not considered yet. And may have would have never considered at all. And I always find that very intriguing. And he's basing those thoughts off of real life experiences.
Absolutely. And yeah, I can totally imagine why he would not want to revisit something as horrific as a double homicide of children. In terms of going towards trial, obviously, Alan plays a part of the book. The arrest is certainly covered. And I guess as you're thinking about it going forward, just beyond the book, how can we as people in the true crime space where we're creating true crime content, doing these episodes, how can we balance being fair to Alan, who's obviously not been convicted yet, but while also, covering it? I think you kind of see a range of reactions where some people are saying, well, we assume it's not my person of interest, so it must be a cover-up and he's an innocent man. And then you have people who are kind of on the fence waiting for more information. That's, I think, where we are. And then you have people who are saying he got arrested, therefore he's guilty. And, we talked a bit earlier about why that's a problem. And how do you sort of juggle those issues when you're thinking about that?
And I would love to have a great answer for you here. I think it's very difficult, right? We want our pound of flesh. We want this is something horrible that somebody orchestrated by design and happened to two great, wonderful teenagers that had great families, lived in a wonderful community. I do talk about this in the book, and it's not something that I've talked about for the first time. I've said this on True Crime Garage for years. When you kill a child, when you abduct a child, it's not just a crime against that individual or that individual's family, friends, school, what have you. It's a crime against the entire community. And remember when we were kids and we'd watch the old black and white horror films, and they would have, not that I'm, I just made myself sound like I'm like 80 years old, but I used to watch the old horror films with my grandfather. And, you remember all of the village people, all of the townspeople with the torches and the pitchforks trying to chase down Frankenstein's monster. That's what this is. That's what it should be, right? When somebody does something like this is a crime against the whole community. And the community here, in this case, banded together. They raised all kinds of money for reward money. They were putting up ribbons. They stood together, and they stood behind their women and men of law enforcement in this case. And unfortunately, sometimes we see that the best times for us to come together and to be strong together is in the wake of some kind of tragedy. The Boston Marathon bombing, 9/11, here in Delphi, Carroll County, Indiana, the murder of these two girls. And, so the community comes together. I understand that they want their pound of flesh. I understand that, you want somebody, and this is what happened in this case, and it happens so often in these child cases, is that when it goes unsolved for a while, people start to turn on law enforcement because they want somebody to blame. They want to be able to point the finger at someone and say, this is the problem. This is why this horrible thing happened. And we've seen it in cases, too, where people start to point to the family. Well, those girls shouldn't have been out there that day. Or, what kind of family backgrounds do they have that this would happen to these kids and not other kids? And so we got to pump the brakes a little bit, because while we do want somebody to point at, remember, we've already said and agreed we do have this good system that will figure it out. The law enforcement has done their part so far. They've put a guy in handcuffs. There's evidence to suggest that he is the right guy. And now we're going to take this thing to court and get it sorted out. Now, the flip side of that was, and this aggravated me quite a bit there, and I don't remember. It's good that I don't remember what reporter it was, because it probably shouldn't be blasting the person publicly. But somebody had posted, we started seeing pictures and hearing reports from Alan's defense team that, he's losing weight and he's not sleeping and he's behaving strangely because of the conditions of where he's locked up and the environment that he's in. And so somebody had posted on Twitter a picture of him, and it was almost like a gotcha moment. Like they were trying to set a trap, because of course it's going to be the knee-jerk reaction, a very human knee-jerk reaction of a lot of people started replying and going, you know what, I don't care if he's malnourished or not sleeping. Other people saying, good, we should do this to him. And her reply to everyone was almost like, gotcha, don't, keep in mind he's innocent until proven guilty. So you just think that we should just do this and that, kind of blasting the people for their reply. And I get what her argument is, but I posted on there short and sweet. Look, he has the right to a speedy trial. And if this truly is the situation, if his defense team is truly worried about his health, given the situation that he's in, they have the right to try to push this thing sooner to trial rather than later. And yes, let's figure this out the way we're supposed to in the court of law. If he ends up being the guy, you guys notice we talk about investigating the investigation. You notice I'm picking my words here rather carefully. But if he ends up being the guy, I do hope that he gets sentenced to the most severe, the strictest of penalties that they can offer in the state, because I can't think of a case that's more deserving of a harsh punishment.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I'll say we've been a little bit disturbed, I think, with the Allen in prison thing, just about the secrecy or it not respond, the not law enforcement. It's actually coming from the prosecution, because law enforcement's under a gag order. And we're kind of like, if they're saying that, you should probably say, actually, the reality is more complicated, or we're treating him very well, but that's another matter.
Well, right. And I mean, we can speculate on it, but there's also, it wouldn't be terribly unheard of or out of the realm of possibility that he has gone through a physical change, and maybe even some kind of mental and emotional change that we can't see from a picture, based off of just the situation where he may not be being mistreated at all. Or when you are being charged with these types of crimes, it's not, I'm not saying it's right, but it's not unheard of that those people that you are put around, that either are there to watch you or are there because they were put there themselves, they might have some interesting things to say and suggest to you. I think the likelihood of my suspicion of what's going on is he's probably not sleeping very well, and he's probably rather paranoid about watching his back, because it was going to happen, right? Whoever was arrested for this, they put a target on themselves. Well, maybe not put a target on themselves, but whoever did this, should the right person be arrested, they put a target on themselves.
Right. Crimes against children are rarely handled.
And Richard Allen, Richard Allen has a family too. So if he is what law enforcement is saying he is, that's going to change a lot of things for him in his world that he's built and surrounded himself with for nearly 50 years.
Yeah. I'm curious, just going into trial, there is a lot we continuously don't know. And what remaining questions do you have that you would love to have answered about the Delphi case, sort of as we go into trial or during trial? What's the most important thing that you would like sort of filled in?
Well, I kind of left the door open a little bit, and I don't know that everybody will pick up on this when they read the book, but I left the door open a little bit on the idea that there could be someone out there with some kind of involvement. I don't want to speculate as to what that level of involvement would be. I think that there's still a slight possibility of that. And if that's the case, and Richard Allen is guilty, was involved, was there, did this. If there was ever a time for him to come clean and talk, now's the time. Now's the time to do that. But where my questions go, and that was a theory I had for a very long period of time, that it might have been two people involved, or at the very least that Bridge Guy had some help in some way, whether it was unknowingly or knowingly by the person that was helping him, maybe a false alibi or anything of that nature. I'm not clinging to that theory with this statement or by leaving that door open, but you guys have seen it. And we've seen it more than a dozen times just in this one case alone. Until we know, we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And the questions that I have that I think I have many more that I hope will be answered, but there's a couple that I think will be answered. And one of them that sits at the top of that list is, it looks to me from a lot of the stuff I reviewed that police were looking for some kind of cell phone or some kind of device that they believe was drawing a signal and was at the crime scene at the time that the abduction and murders took place. And it looks to me like I have not seen anything to suggest that they found that device, or how much they know about that device. But I think that that's something we are going to learn more about if they have that device and know what it is, or know why they're looking for it at the very least. It could be something that works well for the prosecution. If they don't have the device or don't understand what it is or why they're looking for it, then it could be the flip of that. It could be something that the defense brings to our attention as to a reason why they may not have the right person.
Absolutely. And then I guess, trial is, goodness knows how far away that's going to end up being. We'll probably know more in June after the after the bail hearing.
Yep.
But what sort of sources will you be following along once trial starts as this kind of story develops? I know you mentioned in the book, really following and actually being subscribed to the Carroll County Comet, which is, of course, the local hometown newspaper, the reporters on the ground there. How will you kind of continue to follow this story going forward?
Well, yeah, I still have my Carroll County Comet subscription. And actually, I was sitting here when I knew you guys would be calling. I thought, when and why did I mean, I know that the inspiration to get that subscription was because of the Delphi case, but I mean, it's 250 miles away from me. I don't remember how I even learned to subscribe to that, but I've been getting it for so many years now that it's just become a weekly thing. And I scan it every week looking for information. And heck, I think there was a period of time that I thought, well, if I look at enough faces in this local newspaper, maybe I will see Bridge Guy at some point. I think that's what this case has done to some people. It certainly did it to me, where you're making irrational thoughts about the case. But, your guys' show has been one that I've paid attention to because of your continued great work on the Delphi case and being able to get information that others can't. And so, I'll continue to listen to Murder Sheet. I'll continue to read the Carroll County Comment. And of course, law enforcement, when they choose to release information, that's always the stuff that we hope for the most. Right. And, I'll continue listening to you guys and continue reading the Carroll County Comment, because with this case, with most cases never receive the amount of media attention that this case does.
Mm-hmm.
And you get cases like John Benet Ramsey, the Delphi case, where you could spend 3 months of your life from morning till night researching the case, everything you can get your hands on. But the majority of it is either going to be a regurgitation of the story you just read, or it's going to be crap. It's going to be nonsense. And so with this case, with the Delphi case, you do really have to pick and choose where you want to get your information.
Absolutely. And thanks so much for listening. We do appreciate it.
This might be a bit premature, but what is your next book going to be about?
Thanks, Kevin. I would hope to return to maybe not Unsolved in Ohio, the book that I was working on that I never finished before the podcast started, but probably something in that realm. Probably something, because I've had a lifelong fascination with Ohio cold cases, and probably something in that regard where it's I'm a Midwest boy, but Delphi, as I said, is still over 200 miles away from me. So probably something a little more on the local level, and some Ohio cases that I've followed for decades now.
Absolutely. Well, that's one thing we really appreciate about you guys. You're Midwestern like us, and you're kind of this 2-person team doing the podcast and doing really in-depth research. So we appreciate you and the captain with the work you're doing on True Crime Garage, and we so appreciate you talking to us about your book. I guess, is there anything, we've kept you for like over an hour, so is there anything we didn't ask you about that you wanted to mention?
No, not at all. And like I said, I'm not doing a whole lot of podcasts talking about the book. So because I do a true crime podcast, and because I spend so much of my week up to my eyeballs in tragedy and murder and blood, and people are always shocked about this, but outside of the pages of books, I don't surround myself with too much true crime after the workday is done. So I'm very selective about the true crime podcast that I listen to, and your guys has been great, and one that I will continue to listen to. So no, I don't. I think we touched on everything here today, and I just wanted to reiterate that I'm very glad to do your show. And this is your show has reminded people about this case time and time again, just like True Crime Garage has. So in a weird way, we almost feel a bit of a partnership with you guys.
We do too, and we really appreciate you saying that. Respect and feeling is mutual. And where can people get the book?
Well, it's available now on Amazon. The release date is technically May 23rd, but it came out. They did a soft release, I guess that's what they call it in the book business. But it is out on Audible. It's out hardback and paperback on Amazon is the easiest way to get it. You can also go to Wild Blue Press, their website. It's available there. And then periodically, we are selling signed copies on True Crime Garage. So that's truecrimegarage.com.
Very, very cool. And thanks again, Nick. It was really great talking to you. We feel like this was an awesome conversation. We appreciate you taking the time, and thanks for sticking with us, even though we ran well over an hour.
Hey, it was my pleasure, Kevin. Anya, thank you so much for letting me come on the show.
Thanks so much to Nick for talking to us. Check out him and the captain on True Crime Garage.
We'll also include a link to his book in our show notes, so you can check that out too. Thanks so much for listening to The Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for The Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening. Hello, Murder Sheet listeners. Thank you so much for sticking with us until the very end. Just wanted to take a moment as we close out to thank our sponsor, HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit. They are #1 for a reason, folks. Kevin and I have been loving the meals we're getting from HelloFresh. We're talking farm fresh produce, protein, all sorts of customizable options to get you exactly what you and your family need. It's very delicious, it's very nutritious, and it's quite affordable. So it ticks off all our boxes. We've been very happy with the service. And, would love for you guys to try it out if you're curious, or if you've tried it out in the past and enjoyed it, get that discount. It's hellofresh.com/msheet16. And then you're going to plug in the code msheet16. You get 16 free meals plus free shipping. You can't beat that. We've really been delighted by it. We work very hard on the podcast. It takes up a lot of time. It's our small business. We really enjoy the work. We enjoy conversing with all of you every week. But at the same time, it's nice for Kevin and I to kind of have something to do outside of office hours, and cooking these meals has been really fun. We're terrible in the kitchen, like disastrous. I mean, like I can tell you horror stories. I probably shouldn't get into it on the podcast, but I mean, some pretty disastrous moments involving our cooking. Nothing life-threatening, but definitely stuff that we tried to be overly ambitious about, and it either went horribly wrong or it ended up costing like way more than it should have because we didn't properly like think about ingredients, and we're not gifted in the realm of the kitchen. But HelloFresh makes us pretend like we are, because everything is so pre-portioned and pre-planned, and the instructions are super clear, so like you're not going to mess it up if you're like us. And if you're good in the kitchen, then it's just less of a hassle, and you get everything that you need. You don't have to run out to the grocery store. So super nice. Try it out. I've really enjoyed the meals that they've sent us so far. I can say that Kevin has too. I highlight that because Kevin is pretty picky when it comes to food. He does not like everything. He has pretty strong specifications and preferences. Very much cares about things like fresh produce and farm produce and things like that. So he's very picky, and I think the fact that he is really enjoying HelloFresh is a testament to the quality here, because he's a stickler for that kind of thing. And so if you are, I think you will enjoy it as well. And again, the URL and promo code that'll get you a sweet discount is hellofresh.com/msheet16. That's MSHEET 16. And use code msheet16. You're going to get 16 free meals plus free shipping. We hope you enjoy it. And again, thank you so much for listening.